Awesome. Okay, I'm Karen Gunnell, and I'm so excited to have Casey Pehrson with us tonight. So, Casey, I know that I've told you briefly, I've been sharing the Depression Cure for the last several months. Like every Thursday, I break down a chapter in just a couple small groups that I'm part of. And I'm so excited because Casey's actually the one that introduced it to me. So let me tell you a little bit about Casey. She has been working with youth for about 15 years in various capacities, including 7 years at a therapeutical boarding school. And most recently, she's been with the Jordan School District in Utah for 8 years as a school psychologist. She earned her graduate degree in school psychology from Brigham Young University in Utah, where she is currently an adjunct faculty member. She enjoys traveling and reading, playing the piano, spending time with family and friends, and ice cream. She's a native of Kansas City, and she's an avid sports fan, especially over Casey's teams. We are so glad to have you here, Casey. I feel like this has just kind of changed the course of our lives a little bit with the Depression Cure, and I just wanted to ask you a few questions about it. So really, how first did you get into school psychology? Like what made you go that way?
Yeah, actually, funny story. It was kind of a fluke. It started in high school, interestingly enough. So in high school, I was really interested in photography. And so I was maxing out all of the photography classes possible in my high school. And I was signed up my senior year. I was so excited because I was signed up for the last one, and it was photojournalism. But then it ended up conflicting with something in my schedule. And so they couldn't fit photojournalism in, and they bumped me and put me in this rando class, basic psychology. And I was like, what is that? Took it, loved it. Ended up dropping out of something second semester my senior year to take advanced psychology, and went that route in college and never looked back. And so that tied into, I've worked with youth pretty much since I was a youth. And that seemed to be a pretty direct course there that could combine both of those kind of interests and passions. So.
That's awesome. I feel like because of that story, it was just fate that you needed to be here and helping so many people just because of a class change in high school. That's so cool. So the strategies in the Depression Cure are really based on like a natural method, a natural way of treating depression and helping manage depression. And as a school psychologist, I can only imagine that you're dealing with so much, especially this year with COVID. Have you seen an increase in the cases?
Yes. And a lot of that has to do with our world's being turned upside down. And it's interesting. Last week, we realized that we just marked the 1 year mark since when everything turned upside down. And so there's been a lot of lifestyle changes that have happened as a result of this. And one of the big ones, and one of the big points that the Depression Cure makes, it's kind of forced isolation on to people. We're still able to connect, but our connections are impacted. And yeah, we're noticing the effects of that. And a lot of those are depressive in nature. So right. Yes, this year has made a huge difference.
So tell me, how did you stumble upon the Depression Cure? How did you start using the strategies? What inspired you there?
Yeah. Well, actually, in Jordan School District, when I first started in Jordan School District, I was at an elementary school. And I had spent the first part of my career working with teenagers. And so I was used to that. And all of a sudden, this was a major flip where they were like, hey, go work with kids. And I was like, I don't know how, but I had to figure it out. So I start in my job at elementary school. The overwhelming majority of what I was working with little kids at elementary school level was anxiety. And kids would come in, and we know that anxiety sensation. It's the fight or flight. It's the heart racing. It's the breathing rapidly. It's that anxious energy that feels like it needs to go somewhere, but it doesn't know where it needs to go. And so I was observing this was coming into my office constantly, day in, day out. So I had to figure out how to counsel it. That was my whole gig. But observing this, I noticed, hey, this anxiety thing has a lot of energy to it. I wonder if we could figure out how to harness that energy, rechannel it in a different direction. I wonder if that could effectively counsel anxiety. And not because I'm any sort of talented, but because I had a lot of opportunities for practice. I found out that worked. So students would come in, we would harness that energy, we'd use some breathing exercises, some mindfulness techniques, some grounding practices, harness the energy, and then we'd rechannel in a different direction. All right, let's identify the problem. Let's break it down. Let's identify your resources. Let's make a plan, start taking steps. And so I got good at counseling anxiety, not because I'm any sort of talented, but because I had lots of opportunities for practice. And that's what we were doing. It was harness, rechannel, day in, day out. All of a sudden, they bumped me up to the high school, which was my normal age group that I was used to working with. But I had a new phenomenon in the public schools that I didn't have as much of in the therapeutic boarding school where I was working. So the overwhelming majority, and that's where I am to this day, I'm a school psychologist at a high school. The overwhelming majority of what I work with day in and day out in high school is depression. So these students would come in my office and I was like, okay, this is a new thing, but I wonder if we could counsel it the same way that we counsel the anxiety. Let's find the energy, let's harness it, let's rechannel in a different direction. But you can imagine what I was finding when I was looking for energy in students with depression. There is none. And so I was like, okay, that's not going to work. I'm going on a treasure hunt for nothing. Let's bag that plan, try something else. But I knew that they needed energy. And I was like, okay, you don't have any energy. That's what you need. Here you go. Take mine. And so I would give students a pep talk. I would stand up on my desk, sometimes literally, and deliver some sort of motivational speech. And I could make students smile, sometimes laugh while they were in the office with me. And I felt like, hey, maybe that's progress. I don't think they've smiled or laughed in a while. But between my couch and the door, it was like that energy never existed. It just sloughed off of them like Teflon. And so I had to learn they couldn't get energy from me. They couldn't borrow it from me. It couldn't be transferred from me. It had to be self-generated. So that was the quest, was how do we help these students self-generate this energy that they need? So I went on a tear. I read every book I could find on depression. I read over 24 books on depression. And most of them were unhelpful. Some of them made me depressed afterward. And so, so after this reading all of this, finally I got a book that changed everything. And that was The Depression Cure. I read that book and the light went on. So Dr. Lardy, he's out of the University of Kansas and I'm from Kansas City. And so I was like, cool, smart guy from Kansas. That's fun. But this guy had it figured out. And he goes through and he breaks it down. You've gone through the book. And so I'm not spoiling it for anybody, but I'll do the synopsis. Basically he's a clinician and he was like, whoa, he's like, everybody depressed. All my clients are depressed. What's happening here? So he wanted to study it. He did a meta-analysis. He's like, give me all the studies of depression. He was like, I want to gather them all up. And when he gathered them all up and he lined them all up, he found something interesting. He was like, hey, if you look at depression across time, it hums along pretty steadily. And then all of a sudden it goes kaboom. So this is a pretty relatively modern phenomenon. So we got interested. He was like, what in the world were our ancestors doing back then that we aren't doing now? Or what are we doing now that our ancestors weren't doing back then that could be contributing to this? So he goes through and he finds the 6 areas that you've talked about in the class. We'll see if I can remember what he calls them. These make sense though, when we think about modern day lifestyle, because he talks first about brain food, where he says, hey, our ancestors, they ate way better than we did. They ate off the land, they ate what they grew, they prepared their own meals. We eat junk or we don't eat. So I ask that question out of my office a lot to students. Did you eat breakfast? And the answer that I get 85% of the time is no. And 10% of the time students will be like, yeah, I had a Reese's peanut butter cup and a Gatorade. I'm like, oh, and how do you feel? Or worse, they'll be like, I had a Monster drink and some Pop Rocks. And I'm like, my goodness, your stomach's going to explode. This is an emergency. So we're trying to just sustain ourselves on things that aren't designed to sustain us. So brain food was his first area they talked about. He talked about physical exercise. He goes, hey, our ancestors, they had jobs that made them move. That was part of their livelihood. They had to get up and move. They had to chase down game. They were out checking hay bales. They were out pushing plows. And this will make me sound real lazy, but I'm not unique. My job I have an office chair in my office, and I could literally do my entire job from my chair. I would have to make some phone calls, send some emails to get people summoned to me, but I could do my entire job from my chair, and it would not affect my job effectiveness at all.
Right.
And a lot of people have jobs like that. The next one ties into it. He talks about sunlight exposure, and he says, hey, our ancestors, those jobs that were manual labor jobs, they were manual labor jobs that were outside. So the vitamin D that you get from the sun, they were getting that as part of their livelihood. And now in my office, referring to my office again, I have a big, beautiful office with windows now. You'll never hear me complain about my office. But I used to have, I've had some terrible offices in my career. One of them in particular, I had this tiny little closet office that you could barely move a chair back and forth in, no windows. And there were some days at work, lots of days at work actually, where I went to work when it was dark and I got home when it was dark. And I was like, I have no idea if the sun shone today because I was not there to witness it. So sunlight exposure is the next one. He talks about social support, where he says, hey, our ancestors, they had much more of a tribal mentality. Their strength in numbers, we're all in this together. It wasn't very evolutionary for them to go off on their own. They'd get picked off really quickly. It was evolutionary to have a tribe and to stick together. Whereas nowadays, we tend to have our separate corners in our big houses, and we'll go to our separate corners and shut each other out. Or we think we're being social because we're on social media. And I'm not here to knock social media. I've learned from my students, because my students have told me, Casey, when you talk about phones, sometimes it sounds like an old person complaining. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to sound like that. So I've developed a rule of thumb that so far hasn't offended anybody. Hopefully that still holds true. But what I tell my students is, if you're interacting with other humans in real life, in real time, face to face, and you're using social media and texting as a supplement to that, great, keep doing it. That's good. But if you never see another human in real life, in real time ever, but you're texting and you're on social media all the time, you're using it as a replacement for real life social interaction, no, it's not working for you. It's not going to hack it for you. So if it's a supplement, it's great. If it's a replacement, not great. So that so far has been a rule of thumb that has not offended anybody. But
that's awesome.
That was his area that he talks about, was social support. The next one that he talks about is engaging activities. And he says, hey, our ancestors had a much better work-life separation than us. Once the plows were pushed, the plows stayed out on the field. Once the cows were milked, the cows stayed out on the farm. And we are not good at separating work and life. And especially with COVID, our offices and our homes are now like interchangeable. Our office is our home and our home is our office and all sorts of things. So our boundaries have suffered in a big way. And I know for me particularly, I should probably rethink my life's choices, but I have my work email synced to my phone. And so at any given time, I can be bombarded with work outside of work hours. And does that impact my life? Yes, it does. And I think a lot of people who have that have made that choice on their phones too. They've probably noticed the same thing. We're not letting our brains cool down or separate from work. They're fired up all the time. We don't let them cool down. So that's the engaging activities piece. And then the last area that he talks about is sleep. And he says, hey, our ancestors, they were much better at sleep than we are. They had a much more natural circadian rhythm. They got up when the sun got up, they went down when the sun went down. We stink at sleep. And the three most common ways that I've seen that we stink at sleep, there's one that's like by far the number one way that we all stink at sleep, and it's that we don't get enough. Right. So that's a problem. There's all sorts of, actually the coolest, there's a bunch of stuff happening physiologically and psychologically, all through your system while you're sleeping. I just finished this long, dense, fascinatingly boring book on sleep. I won't tell you what it is with that rave review. But basically that book I could sum up in a sentence, and it is, there is no part of us that is not benefited by sleep. But we have to have a certain number of hours of sleep to get the full benefits. And we're not getting that. And one of the coolest things that happens during sleep, and this is the one that blows students' minds when we talk to them about it, is the waste management process that's happening while you're sleeping. So quick context to this: from your neck down, your body has natural processes that help it get rid of the stuff that it doesn't need. It sloughs off its own toxins and gets rid of its waste while you're awake. But your brain, its system to get rid of its waste, it's called the glymphatic system, and it's barely operable while you're awake, but it fires up while you're asleep. And all those, I call them brain janitors, all those brain janitors come out and they sweep up after all of the toxins of the day. They're sweeping those out and giving your brain a bath at night, but they don't come out until after a certain number of hours. And so we've got to get that certain number of hours in order for those brain janitors to come out. So I was teaching this to a group of students, and one of the students, she exclaimed in the middle of class. She goes, "Oh my gosh." And everybody looked at her because she just exclaimed in the middle of class. And she was like, "Are you saying we have like brain poop?" And then she got really embarrassed and like it looked like she wanted to take it back. Like, "Oh no, what did I just say?" And I was like, "Yes, that's exactly what we're saying. We have brain poop. And the way that your brain gets rid of it, the way that it flushes it off is through sleep." So good for figuring that out and making that connection. But the number one way that we stink at sleep is we don't get enough. Mm-hmm. There is a common way that, especially teenagers that I'm working with, they stink at sleep because they splice it. So my students will come home and they're so exhausted after school that they'll crash into a 4.5 hour power nap. But there's no such thing as a 4.5 hour power nap.
No way.
That's not a thing. There's nothing empowering about a 4.5 hour nap. There's such thing as a 30-minute power nap. 30 minutes or under, that's your power nap zone. 4.5 hours though, forget it. You're not going to be empowered by that kind of a nap. But that's what they do. They crash for 4.5 hours and then they can't fall asleep again until 3 a.m. And then this vicious cycle ensues. So we need our sleep all in one go. Or if we do take naps, I'm all for naps, 30 minutes or under. Yeah. But we're splicing our sleep. That's our second way that we stink at sleep. Third way, less common in general, but more common, especially among populations with major depressive disorder, is that we're oversleeping. We're sleeping too much. And so there's a law of kind of diminishing returns with sleep. And it's like Goldilocks, where we're searching for that just right. And there is a too hot and there is a too cold. Just right, that's going to be our 7 to 8 hours of sleep as adults. It's going to be our 8 to 10 for teenagers. 9.25 is shown to be optimal for teens. And it's 9 to 11 for elementary age kids. So that's your just right zone. If we're not getting the full amount of sleep, then we're obviously not going to get the full benefits of sleep. That's our sort of too cold. But if we're getting too much sleep, we're going to negate some of those benefits. And so that's our too hot. And so we need to find that just right zone.
Wow.
That is easier said than done for a lot of us. But this guy, when he lined out all these things, I was like, oh my gosh, he's got it. Like, and he's packaged them all together. This is it. All my things that I'm working on with students who are depressed, they're not doing these things, or they're maybe doing one of the things. They're sleeping, but they're sleeping too much. And I was like, this dude, he's got it. This is it. So the way to remember it, this is a true story actually. The day after I finished this book, I was like, this dude's got it. It like blew my mind. The universe light bulb went on. I was like, this is it. And I came in the very next day. I'd barely even set my stuff down. And I had a severely depressed student referred to me. And so she's walking me through it. She's telling me her story and she's breaking my heart with how long she's been feeling this way. And so I'm going through this with her. And then we're kind of wrapping up. And I looked at her and I was like, hey, I just read this book. I was like, I don't know if you're interested. And she's like, yeah, actually, I want to know. So I went through, I just barely finished this book and I'm trying to rattle off the 6 things. And I forgot 2 of them. And I was like, oh, we have a problem. Like I had a crisis. I was like, okay, this dude's got to figure it out. But if I, as the school psychologist, I can't even remember these things, and I'm going to talk about these things every day to everybody who will listen, how in the world am I supposed to expect students to remember these things? So I went through and I was like, I gotta come up with a way. So I tried to make an acronym out of his names for this stuff. So I stacked all the things up on top of each other, and the best I could make it spell was BEPS with 3 S's. And I was like, that's not very catchy. And even if you can remember BEPS with 3 S's, it's really hard to remember what BEPS with 3 S's stands for, because they all have 2 words to it: brain food, engaging activity, physical exercise, social support, sunlight exposure, sleep. I can do it only because I've talked about this enough, but it's hard to remember all of that. So I was like, can we simplify it? Can we rename his stuff, make it spell something hopefully cool? And that's where SELFIE came in.
That's awesome.
So SELFIE is sleep, exercise, light, fun, interaction, eating well. So Dr. Alardi's 6 things, I just renamed them to spell something hopefully slightly more memorable, but that's kind of the context of where all that came from.
That is awesome. Yeah, so I know that so Casey first introduced it to me in a religious setting with our youth and our teenagers, and since then our religious leader has just taken off with it and wanted to share it with everybody. So it's gone like into bigger organizations. We call them our stake. And it's been awesome. And he just says, remember the selfie. How are you doing with your selfie? Like, it's something that he's trying to ingrain into all the teenagers in our religious organization. So you've made an impact for sure. So my next question for you, Casey, then, you've told us a simple way to remember selfie. And you say you're helping these teenagers with this method. So can you tell us like some of the scenarios, like, is it helping? What are their results that they're seeing?
Yeah. Interesting, funny little anecdotes. So when this first kind of developed, it was like, hey, we need to teach this on a mass scale, like beyond just students with depression. We can all benefit like this. Like, I feel like Oprah when I talk about these things, because you get to feel better, everybody gets to feel better. And it's not just for people with depression, which is the most exciting part of it. So no matter who you are, whether you're like, I'm depressed, I'm not depressed, whatever it is, this can help you. And that's what's cool about it. And so that's where we're like, let's take it to the masses. So we first taught this, my high school is Harriman High School. That's the high school where I work. And so I'll never forget the day. It was October 4th of 2018 was the first time that we taught this on a mass scale. And we had this army of students, because I've realized with teenagers, they'll listen to each other more than they'll listen to adults. And so I use that, rather than being mad at that, I use that as leverage. And so I'm like, okay, we're going to get this army of teenagers and we're going to pull them all together. I had 216 of them.
Oh, wow.
So we pull all these students together, and I wrote this lesson on SELFIE that they went and delivered to their peers. So I'd written the lesson, but then they kind of put themselves into it, and they were the ones that actually taught it to each other. So October 4th, 2018, during our intervention period, was when these 216 students went out and taught SELFIE. And afterwards, like, we threw them all out there and off they went. And I was like, Jesus, take the wheel. And like, it was happening. And then it happened so fast. And afterward, I had a bunch of students in my office, and I was congratulating them on great job with your presentations, how'd it go, and we're kind of talking about this afterwards. And I hear this large group of booming male voices. So my office sits on the main hallway of Harriman High School. And fun fact about Harriman High School is that main hallway is a quarter of a mile long.
Wow.
So I'm hearing this group of booming male voices. And they're getting closer, and then they're fading away. But all the way down the hallway, they're chanting sleep, exercise, life, fun, interaction, eating well. And I'm gonna be honest with you, my first reaction to that was not a good one. I was horrified. I was like, oh my goodness, what's going on here? They're making fun of it. Holy cow, what have I done? Like, I had this catastrophic kind of interpretation of this, but then luckily it was a quick reframe, because it was like, I don't care if they're making fun of it. they remember it. They're
Yeah,
chanting
seriously.
it all the way down a quarter of a mile hallway. And so that's been kind of fun to see, is it's memorable. Some of my students would be like, it's cheesy, but it's memorable. But most students say not that it's cheesy, but that it's helpful, and that it gives them a framework. And they'll tell me that they check their selfies every day and make sure that they've kind of addressed each area. And the days that they've missed areas, they're like, oh, I feel the difference. And it makes sense why, because they've got kind of selfie as a framework for it. So lots of testimonials have rolled in from students saying, the increased energy, the increased mood. And I give a presentation on this thing. The normal presentation that I give is 3 hours long.
Oh, wow.
And there's a big chunk of this, about a third of it is devoted to the science of selfie. And we give you all the big sciencey fancy terms for all the neurotransmitters, hormones, vitamins, minerals, processes that get going in the body through selfie. We throw out all the big words, the oxytocin and the dopamine and the serotonin and the omega-3s, like we toss them all out there. And that's 50 minutes of this presentation. But I can sum up 50 minutes in one sentence. That might be a run on, but I'll try to get it. Basically, with selfie, when you're doing selfie, I'm not a doctor, but I feel like one, because this stuff is medicinal. You're getting chemicals, you're getting neurotransmitters, vitamins, hormones, minerals, processes going in your body that do two things. They give you energy and they boost your mood. And isn't that exactly what you need when you're depressed? Not just when you're depressed. Isn't that what a lot of us need all the time? We need those energy boosters. We need those mood boosters. And this selfie gets those for you naturally. It's science. This is what happens. Science is what happens. Energy boosters, mood boosters through this selfie stuff. So kind of cool and kind of fun to see students recognize that in their personal experiences and in their lives. So
that is really cool. So just kind of following up with that. So some of the students you work with, I'm sure, are probably seeing therapists or on medicine, and they're just doing this right along. And have they noticed help with that?
Yeah.
Decreasing medications, maybe, stuff like that.
Yeah. So there's kind of a trifecta for people with major depressive disorder. And for me working with my students, this is what I've seen is the trifecta. And medications, they can be very helpful for people. And so for a lot of people, that's part of the trifecta is this medication piece. Other people, they can be fine without medication, but that's something to consult with a doctor or psychiatrist about, because for a lot of people that is helpful. And then for other people, therapy, that's that processing through it with somebody, airing things out, like kind of examining your cognitions, your thoughts and your behaviors and things like that can be helpful too. So that can be a part 2 of the trifecta. So we got medication, we got therapy. And then the part that we miss is this stuff. This lifestyle stuff needs to be part of the trifecta to get your best results. And when you put that in there, boom, that's when you're at your best. So
that's awesome. I totally agree. I mean, I don't have depression. My husband does. He's put these things into play along with some great supplements, and I've seen a change in him. It's been awesome. But because I've been studying it and learning about it, I can totally see a change in me too. Some people ask, like, is physical health, mental health, what do you take care of more, your mental health, your physical health? And I say, like, it's together. Like, when I don't take care of my physical body, then my mental health definitely declines.
Absolutely.
They're intertwined. So I totally agree with what you're saying. I think it's so incredible that you put this together in a simple way. You're helping so many people. So let me just final question here as we close up. How do people, can they go somewhere to get this information? Is there an easy way to find this information? Tell us a little bit about your process, your role, maybe where they can go to find you and more information about you.
Yeah. So The Depression Cure, I recommend that book wholeheartedly. Like I said, I went through a lot of books to find that book, and that was the one that we needed.
Yeah.
So The Depression Cure by Dr. Stephen Alardi, check that one out. He's given some TED Talks and things too. You can kind of research him and find his stuff. He's done all the research on this. And I just came up with the cute name for it. So I am working on a website and a book though, to help kind of deliver this to the masses. And the website is www.selfiemethod.org. So it's in the works right now, getting ready to launch. And that's gonna give a lot of the information and the tips and tricks and videos and things like materials and things like that. So
awesome. When that launches, I'll be sure to share with my listeners and viewers. That's so cool. So thank you so much for your time tonight. You have just spilled so much into us. And I hope everybody watches this because everybody needs it and goes and gets the book. I say you can get it on Amazon. Like at first I checked it out from the library and it just wasn't enough for me. I went and bought it so I could underline it and take notes and just have it forever.
Oh yeah, for sure. Mine is like all completely highlighted in notes, and yeah, I have multiple copies myself, so it's a good one.
Nice. And then one final thing I just thought of before we go, like if people feel like it's kind of overwhelming, would you say there's a certain place to start?
Yeah. And that's the thing. And particularly with people who have major depressive disorder or experiencing depressive symptoms, this list can feel completely overwhelming and debilitating, and almost give people like, you already kind of flog yourself when you're depressed, and we don't want to give you 6 new sticks to flog yourself with of, oh, look at all of these other things that I'm not doing now that I know that I should be. That is not the point. So starting somewhere and starting small. I'm trying to figure out a better name for this. I'm calling it stupid small goals. Cause a lot of times when we set the goal too high, we're so overwhelmed. And so we just don't even try. And the big example of this is exercise. I think a lot of people, when they hear exercise, they're like, oh, in order to properly exercise, I have to get on a treadmill and hate my life for 3 hours. No, actually, in order to properly exercise, a moderate level of exercise is a brisk walk, 15-minute walk 3 times a week. You're at like a moderate level of exercise. So that all of a sudden brings the bar way down more to where it feels more accessible and more achievable. There's another book. I forgot who wrote it. Some smart guy wrote this book. It's called Mini Habits. But he was talking about how he set this New Year's resolution every year of, I'm going to do an exercise regimen. I'm going to do an exercise regimen. And he would be strong on it for like 2 days or like 4 days, like most of us are with our New Year's resolutions. And then it would just like fly out the window. And so year in, year out, he was like, this is the year for exercise. And then year went out and it was like, never mind, next year's the year for exercise. And so he got fed up with himself and he's like, this is dumb. Like I keep setting this goal and I'm not getting it. And so he was like, okay, my new goal, I'm going to set a goal to do 1 push-up per day. And he was almost embarrassed of that goal. Like, that's the dumbest goal ever. Can 1 push-up really do anything? But what ensued was January 1st rolls around and he's like, okay, I got to do my 1 push-up, right? But he gets down and he does the 1 push-up. And then you can imagine what he found while he was down there. It's like, well, I'm started, might as well do some more, right? And then that is how he started his exercise regimen. He brought it down to where the act was like the smallest slice of the habit possible. But then once we do it, we get a little momentum in it. And then that momentum can carry us forward. Can 1 push-up make a difference? No. But yes, because it can get you that momentum toward bigger habits. And so my recommendation, answering your question in a long way, is start somewhere. And if we've got to bring it down to like the smallest slice of the habit possible, that's okay. Because even that little execution of that can give you momentum to pull you forward toward other habits. One of my favorite tricks too with SELFIE is figuring out how you can hit multiple birds with 1 stone. Because if you can start piling these things up to where you're getting multiple of them at the same time, that's when it's magic. So I had a student come into me and he's like, Casey, he's like, I got it. He's like, I'm going to go on a hike with my friends. We're going to go on a picnic. I like, did you see what I did there? He's like, that was exercise, that was light, that was fun, that's interaction, that's eating well. He's like, then I'm gonna come home and I'm gonna take a nap. No, I'm gonna come home and I'm gonna sleep for 9.25 hours that night. He took a pen, he picked it up, he dropped it, and I was like, you got it. I was like, that's selfie. So if you can put some of these things together, then all of a sudden you're getting lots of different science.
Yeah. And it's not so overwhelming because you're finding them.
Exactly. So those are a couple of tricks to get you started, because the knowledge in this is power to an extent, but the real power is the doing of this stuff. We can sit and talk about this stuff all day long, but doing it is going to be what actually is the magic for you.
That's awesome. Well, my page is called Living Brightly with Depression. I have a group, and really that's my whole goal, is to help people know they can live brightly with depression. And I'm in a few other groups, and it's really heavy, like to hear what people are going through with their depression, and to know that there's other avenues and other ways. And if you get that trifecta down, how life can really change. So thanks again for your time, for your knowledge and expertise. And we'll sign off now. Take care.